Well, I am thrilled to bring to this interview Marva Sadler. Marva and I have known each other. I can't even go back how far and how long we've known each other. I know it's been since around 2001.
Roughly, yes.
Yes. And Marva and I met at Franklin Covey, where she was the COO. And Marva has a background in broadcast journalism, actually a degree. And then she went back and got her master's degree, an
Mhm.
MBA. And so she understands business and communication astutely well, both degrees from Brigham Young, and we're both, uh, we are in the alumni lists of Brigham Young University here in Utah. Marva was the COO for Franklin Covey when I was working as a project manager in the innovation and product development arm of the company, writing content and getting the training materials ready. And at that time, I was attracted to work for this lady because I could see that we were hemorrhaging. Franklin Covey was in trouble financially and needed to really do some work. And I heard Marva make this pitch as a COO that we needed to have a project management office. We needed to get our projects completed. You can tell us what the failure rate was, but it was excruciatingly high for a productivity company. And I thought, you know what? I want to follow this person. I was attracted to you because you were a female leader in the executive circle. We didn't have very many of those. And I thought this is amazing for a woman to be in this circle in particular in a conservative state to rise to this level. You must really know your stuff. And then when I started to hear you talk about your idea of helping us drink our own lemonade, because here I was out working on project management training and we weren't applying it back at home. So I thought, she
No, we
has
weren't.
integrity. So that's how I came to know you. And I know you, there's a big story arc from there to here, know you today as the CEO for WBECS. And so
Right.
you've really jumped into the coaching scene. I have deep respect for that. Anything about that past or your present that you think would help the listener get context for who you are?
I think it's important to know that I, like many women in senior executive positions, have gotten where I got by the spider web network mentality rather than the climb the ladder mentality. I have worked in a number of industries, in a number of different kinds of positions. And I've always been attracted by the challenge rather than specifically the business, the industry, or the specific problem. I've been attracted by the challenge overall. And so I have worked in things as diverse as heavy manufacturing, where I was president of a commercial fitness equipment company where everything we did was engineering, design, and manufacture, all the way to I ran a group of car dealerships that were Saturn dealerships. They were very different than your typical car dealership in some ways and very, very similar in others. And yet, there are lessons to be learned in every position, in every opportunity, if we look for the patterns and we look for the opportunities and the challenges. And so I have made my journey a journey of discovery as opposed to a journey that was linear.
Hmm. I think that's a great way to put it. And Sally Helgeson talks in her journal studies about how some women, instead of climbing up a hierarchy or a ladder, build a web like Charlotte did in the Charlotte's Web. And we have
Yeah.
these branches and connections and we can pull things from almost any place. And that's something I've noticed about you is your leadership is astute. It can cross over many, many industries. I know I've called you in as a consultant and a peer on some of the jobs that I've received because I trust that you understand business. In fact, there were times when I felt like you could arm wrestle some of the men in charge of some of these businesses with one hand tied behind your back with what you knew, and that you were willing to take on a challenge and not back down when things were looking tough for someone, and looking out for an entrepreneur's interests sometimes when they're not themselves. So I've benefited from your wisdom, not only working uh, under you in an organization at Franklin Covey, but working side by side in an entrepreneurial venture. And one of the common threads that I want to bring forward in this interview, and we'll cover basically three things, and you can take them on as you would like,
Okay.
is how would you personally define what cultural transformation is? And then what do you think is important for a leader or a coach or someone who's trying to affect cultural change? What are the important pieces? And um, how do you make sure that cultural transformation occurs? I know sometimes we intend it to be one thing and it turns into something even better. How do we make it happen? We can't, hope is not a strategy. And so, how do we make it happen? So, where do you want to start with those?
Well, I'd like to start with how did I get involved in cultural transformation? Because I actually started out my business career as a strategy consultant with Bain and Company in Boston, doing major strategic turnarounds for Fortune 500 corporations.
Mm,
In my strategy consulting time, I worked for organizations like Dun and Bradstreet and Kodak. I worked for IBM. I consulted to IBM, and a number of just the behemoths. And if you think about those organizations, there was a period of time when everyone was in love with strategy, and there were lots of 2x2 matrices, and there were all kinds of things that we did. And what I noticed was at that time was that in many ways I didn't believe in strategy.
mm,
And the reason I didn't believe in strategy was because organizations that put together 5-year plans, for example, for a while I worked uh, as a consultant with Kodak in their corporate strategy department, helping them review and manage their 5 and 10-year plans that all the divisions put together, and helping to analyze what was going on with them, and really trying to come up with constructs that would help their executive team kind of understand this whole portfolio that they had and what they could do with it. And what really became clear to me was that it didn't matter how fancy your strategies were. It all came down to whether your management team, your executive team at whatever level, corporate or divisional or departmental, was capable of executing the strategy.
mm.
And whether that capability was something that was a flash in the pan. You get a new executive and they work really hard at something and they get one thing done and then they move on, and whatever initiative they were working on dies, or whether what they did was lasting. And what I've concluded in my journey is that that the executive capability to implement significantly outweighs how elegant the strategy is, because, and particularly in today's day and age with things changing so rapidly, there's not really such a thing as a legitimate 5-year plan.
Right.
There are the beginnings of plans. I also learned that fairly early on that making a decision, a strategic decision about a direction you want to head, or even an operating decision about something you want to do, is a lot like having a baby. It's the beginning of the process to make the decision, not the end. You don't have a baby and then go, okay, a miracle occurs and I now have an adult child who's completely self-sufficient. There are 20 years or so of shaping that child into the adult that you want to help them become. And some of that you do and they learn, and a lot of it they do and you respond, because
True.
they are themselves from the time they're born. And what I found was decisions in business are a lot like that. There are some things that you can shape as the owner of that decision. There are a lot of things that get out there in the wild and they shape you. That there are things that you could not have predicted because the elements, the culture, if you will, the nature of the people in the organization that have to do the implementing will change the nature of the decision as it goes along. And all you can do is kind of nudge it in the right direction as it moves forward.
Wow.
Now, there are a lot of people who I think have caught on to this since I first came aware of it. Kim Scott in Radical Candor talks about the fact that culture kicks strategy's butt every time. I don't know that she uses those exact words, but I was discussing it with my son the other night. And no matter what you do, no matter how elegant or intellectual or well thought out your strategy, the culture of the organization is going to determine whether you can implement that strategy and whether you'll be successful with it. And as I began to realize that it was the capability of the executives that really mattered and their ability to impact the changes on the ground, I became very familiar with John Cotter's work around leading change. And he's now written several versions of that and he's updated it. But back in the early 90s, which tells you how long ago I was interested in the beginning of this, it became really clear to me that all strategic transformations had to be accompanied by cultural transformations, and that the cultural transformation and the ability to get people doing the right things on a day-to-day basis and making the right decisions when nobody's around to watch, that's what determines whether you're going to be successful. If people only take the right actions or make the decisions when they're being watched or monitored, they only do it when they're going to get public praise for it, you don't have a lasting cultural change. It has to be so embedded that the individuals will choose to do the things that you value as an organization when no one is there to see. And that really is the basis of cultural transformation. To me, it's that, does every individual understand what is expected of them, and culturally, value-wise, how we make decisions, what our vision is, and how we individually, our job ties to that vision, and then what are the values and the implementation tools that I have in order to keep moving that vision forward. And so when we see a culture in chaos, when we see an organization in chaos, frequently what we see is lack of clarity over what are those values and lack of clarity over what are the things we're trying to accomplish with those values.
Yep.
And so when you get that confusion, then you get different people doing what they believe is the right thing based on the value set that they personally have, or the value set that they have perceived the organization to have. But if you don't have consistency, you have chaos.
I love that. I think that's so true. So let's step back for just a minute. Cultural transformation is what? And I'll give you an idea. When we were working on it, it was to take a culture that was not in its integrity. It said it valued planning and productivity, but its projects were failing at a huge degree, over 65%.
Oh, I would have said over 90%.
Fair.
Yeah.
You got to see the numbers across the board. So transformation is going from where you are to where we could be, and maybe in many cases where we need to be, not just a carrot we're chasing, but an actual visceral need that if we don't do this, we may not survive as a company. Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair. In fact, it takes that kind of really strong motivation for a culture to change.
Yes.
You rarely get complacent organizations who are doing very well, who will voluntarily make changes to their culture. It takes a great leader to do that, to be able to get people to give up what they have, if what they have is working even moderately well, in order to move to the promised land of what might work better, because that gap between where I am today and at least I know what's going on, and where I might be in the future, no matter how well we paint that as Shangri-La, there's still a risk there, and people will stay with the known as long as it's reasonably functional for them, unless there is a huge motivation to change, as in, we can't stay here because global warming is causing our streets to flood, and so we can't stay. Or, there is such a compelling possible future that I'm willing to take the risk. And of those two, the fear of failure is much more motivating, frankly, and much more immediate than the promise of greatness.
Yes, we buy, in sales, we buy more to get out of pain than we do to go get a gain.
We do indeed. I used to
So
tell IBM executives, I used to teach them how to pound the wedge into the hole in order to make the client feel more pain so that then it was easier to sell.
yes.
So yes, absolutely.
Well, let's maybe use, I wonder what would happen if we used our cultural change, because we studied it for 9 months and I would say it was successful. There were some other things that happened that sort of ended our stint together, that the whole company had big shifts, like they had a huge earthquake occur to save themselves, and we did our part. But let's talk about the project management office, if we could, as an example. Would that
Well,
be
so
okay?
let's back up just a little bit and start with where did that project management office or that concept for the project management office come from? And it really came from what you were talking about, the disconnect between what we said we valued and what we actually did on a day-to-day basis. And that's where I tend to start always, in looking at the potential for a cultural transformation that will lead to a strategy and operating performance transformation. I look for where are the major disconnects between what we say and what we do, and how do we get them aligned? Because alignment for me is the number one thing that we have to do. As human beings, there is something innate within us that wants to have integrity or alignment. There are very few people of us that get up in the morning, look in the mirror and say, I'm an a-hole and I plan to be an a-hole all day today, and I'm going to make difficulty for other people and I'm going to be a complete jerk. We don't do that. We get up and we say, today I'm going to do my best job. I'm going to be pleasant to other people. I'm going to make an impact. And then at the end of the day, when those things haven't happened, we feel dissonance. How much larger that is when we think about an entire organization that says one thing about itself and does another, and how great the energy loss is in that dissonance as we try to align those things and we can't. Because that really is the essence of it, is how do we take this energy that's being lost, this mental and emotional energy that's being lost in the dissonance, and create alignment so that we can put all of that energy towards productive outcomes.
Yes.
And that's the way I think of cultural transformation. How do we figure out where the misalignment is, decide what we want the alignment to be, and then how do we begin to bring the behaviors to the ideal so that we reduce the misalignment and we unleash energy to be put towards productive behaviors.
And that is exactly why I wanted to join, because it was a question of integrity. And I could see somebody was wanting to do the right thing. It didn't feel good showing up every day and writing materials that talk to other people about being productive when I became aware that we were not productive in our projects. So you put out a call, because the next thing you did was to look for capable people. And you put out a call, and I applied for the associate director position. At the time, I was certified in project management from Franklin Covey and working on my project management certification from the PMI.
I remember.
PMP, and I actually became the very first person who was on our training team to have a PMP, which for me was another act of integrity. Was, if we are going to teach project management, one of us should be certified by the governing body internationally. So how did you get the capable people around you? Because I remember 2 of the hires were not from within.
That's right. And I looked within before I went external, because I do believe in an organization of that size, there should be a pool of talent that could be repurposed or used. And I think in this instance, there were a couple of issues that caused me to go outside. The first issue was what I was asking people to do made them uncomfortable. I was asking people who were in a fairly entrenched culture and were still fairly comfortable with it because they'd not yet faced the realities of where they were. I was asking them to put their faith in going a different direction. and they were comfortable where they were because they'd not yet themselves acknowledged the dissonance of the performance of the organization compared to what needed to be done. So that was the first issue. The second issue was, as you pointed out, I was a female executive in a heavily male dominated organization, and culture generally, geographically, heavily influenced by a specific prevailing religion, which wasn't necessarily comfortable with women in positions of power. And I wasn't willing to acquiesce to that pressure. I was coming out the gate with a significant amount of assertiveness, of confidence, and I was asking people to have confidence in me that I knew what I was doing and that I was going to lead us into a direction that was going to help the organization, even though it was not something any of them had ever done, nor frankly something that I had done in that form before. I had done a lot of operational transformations, but I had not done a project management office. I had not put together a cultural transformation team. And so there was a lot of faith being shown in me by the CEO. But the rest of the organization, the rest of the executives and let's say the directors and managers were not nearly as comfortable with that direction as the vision that the CEO and I had agreed on. Now that's a long answer, but does that help why I went on the outside?
Yes, because I think that brought people from the outside that could say and mirror to the people on the inside, I want this job. This is something important. While there were a couple of us on the inside, uh, a gentleman who was already working in manufacturing, where a lot of the projects would hit home, and myself moving over from writing and developing to using my training background, we were all on board. So you brought us together. We had the key stakeholder, the CEO's blessing, and we started to formulate how we would function. And I remember before we opened, you said we need to have an opening, a launch, because we needed to politic with our own people. We needed to go out and convert them to the idea that we needed to drink our own lemonade. So I don't know if you remember the theme of our opening day in the office, but it was drink your own lemonade, and we served lemonade, we served popcorn, and we all wore lemonade colored shirts that had our Project Management Innovation Center logo. And I will tell you,
I've forgotten that, but yes.
Even the name of it, I went and sat with Stephen M.R. Covey, and he talked to me because you had suggested that I talk to him about naming it. And we sent out a survey, and what people told us was the thing they liked with the project management office, because they didn't know what a PMO was, but when we said project management and that we were going to help them innovate how to use project management, our own training with their projects, they came back and Stephen M.R. said, use the name they want to give you, because what's most important is when you name it well, people then will join you. And so we called it Project Management and Innovation Center because the people wanted to be part of something that was innovative and that was helping toward the hemorrhaging, stopping the hemorrhaging. So we even got creative things in one of the rooms where we could squishy balls and write on the walls with markers and that sort of thing. So
well, and do you remember we took on basically any project that applied to us for help. We found a way to help them at some level. Yes. And we very strategically created a portfolio of projects based on who we thought would be the thought leaders and let's say the cheerleaders for project management success when we helped their projects succeed. Yes. And we deliberately took on projects where the organizations themselves, the divisions or the departments, had repeatedly failed at what they were trying to do. And they were desperate enough to be willing to listen to us while we talked to them about the kinds of changes that they needed to make in their approach. So we hand selected people who were predisposed to listen.
Yeah, and they were feeling the pain. Um, and the thing that you gave me permission to do, because sometimes I was traveling teaching our project management, but you allowed me to offer to these teams, and then sometimes they were handpicked who got invited. I'd spend 2 days every month training initially people on our project management system, and then you allowed me, and I accrued hours and hours and hours and hours of coaching experience, coaching teams. Now that they've had the training, that's one thing, but don't expect that to stick. I coach them with their actual project to go from beginning of project to completion of project. And that came from us sort of having our brainstorming sessions of how do we bring them on, but we we taught them and we coached them. We didn't let them, we held their hand the whole way.
We did, and that was very deliberate. It was deliberate because it had a lot to do with things I'd learned from studying Cotter and leading change. It had a lot to do with the fact that I was by that time a certified theory of constraints Jonah. And so I really looked at these issues as how do we break the constraints? How do we break the cloud of assumptions and find a different path that will be a creative path for people? And it also came from the fact that that was my second stint in the training industry. My first stint was at Achieve Global. And at Achieve Global, we were already talking about the fact that we needed to figure out how to create adult training, adult education that was just in time, just for me. Well, just in time, just for me really means coaching
Yeah.
in some form. Now, at Achieve, we were trying to take it to AI and recorded content and libraries of small batches of recorded content so that you could look it up using AI and then you could get coached. And that in fact is a direction that AI and coaching is going today.
Yes.
We were already experimenting with it. But in that era, in early 2000s, what it really meant was that if we wanted adult learning to really stick and we wanted to accelerate performance quickly, the answer was individual coaching through the problems that they cared about.
Yes.
And that, I really believe, is the genesis of cultural transformation. Cultural transformation takes place by converting one person at a time to the values and the integrity that you want them to have. You can influence people by getting up and giving a great speech or serving popcorn and lemonade and getting everybody excited. But the real transformation takes place at the individual level where a person sees the value of the change that they've made. And the first step in that change is the change from I'm fine, I've got my blinders on and I'm comfortable, to the radical candor of I recognize that there are problems here that are highly complex and that the approaches I have taken in the past are not going to solve these particular issues. I'm going to have to step out of my comfort zone and do things I've never done before.
That is, I'm going to segue off of that because one of the things that we talked about, you and I had several coaching sessions ourselves where you were coaching me. And I remember in one of those coming up with the notion of right after training, the thing that I would assign them to do is go home and apply the process of project management that we were sharing with them to planning a party, a family trip, cleaning their garage. And those people who would go home and apply it to a personal project got greater traction on their professional project because they tried it once. And I think that supports your point.
Well, they tried it once on something that was relatively low risk and relatively within their control, so that the feedback loop was really short. If I'm planning a family trip and I try this and it doesn't work, I can respond to that and correct very quickly. If I've got a corporate project that's a 3-year plan and I plan something and I don't know for 6 months that it doesn't work, it's a lot harder to stick with the plan of continuing to make that effort, which is why it's why Cotter talks about choosing quick wins that will generate energy and that will demonstrate the change in performance. And it's why asking people to try it in their own lives with something that's relatively low risk and relatively high degree of control or autonomy gives them the opportunity to experience success.
And I remember watching you come around. I don't remember which holiday it was, may have been Easter. You came around, I think it was Easter, because you came around with some cookies and you made a point to go to these key people who were implementing projects and other people that were visiting our office, and you made one-to-one contact. I feel like that was a real boost. Like, you would make yourself present. The COO would come to these offices and look in people's faces and give them a cookie. And I felt like that was something that kept people's momentum going.
And you know, I find I'm still doing it today, that every organization I go into, everything that I try to do in terms of a cultural, strategic, operational transformation, I start with, how do I get to know the people? How do I get in front of the right people? How do I help those people become advocates for what we're trying to do? Because again, it's not about the masses. You know, one of the things I learned in broadcast communication that I still talk to my marketing people about today is, we are not talking to those of you or a group or a population to really communicate with someone. We are talking to that individual about what matters to them. Now, if we've pegged it right, what we talk to that individual about and matters to them may also matter to 1,000 other people that we're speaking to individually. But everyone needs to have a personal connection, a personal relationship with the change that we're asking them to make, or the emotional connection fades too quickly and the commitment to make the change doesn't last.
Agreed. Agreed. And you made a really good hire. I didn't understand when you first hired Dave, but you hired someone who had the analytical and financial wherewithal to do ROI studies, and you sent him, and I went with him to the ROI training. I didn't certify in it, but you sent me with him so I could understand what we were going for and meld that with the coaching and the training I was doing. Talk to that, because when we finish this, we can tell them what the ROI study showed about our effectiveness.
Okay. Well, so while we were, you know, attached to an organization that had a big training company, and all of that training was around essentially feel good stuff, you know, things that made you a better leader, things that made you more effective productivity wise because you were doing a better job planning your day. We were really light on the business measures that mattered. And one of the things that I was trying to do in this cultural transformation was I was trying to change the way we talked about accountability, the way that we held ourselves accountable. And in order to hold yourself accountable in a business, you have to speak the language of business. There has to be some common language that everybody can get behind. And that tends to be, you know, the language of accounting, finance, and measuring our return on investment, or measuring what impact are we having. And, you know, speaking of, you know, move forward 20 years, I'm still preaching ROI to people. I'm still preaching that measuring impact and understanding what your key performance indicators are, and then measuring those over time, even if they're not all tied to a financial outcome, but they're tied to something that you know is tied to a financial outcome, still incredibly valuable for holding yourself accountable to, am I actually moving the needle? Because again, if I'm feeling good because somebody gave me a pep talk, or because we had this great conversation and I'm all warm and fuzzy, but tomorrow I come back and nothing's changed, my commitment dies. If, however, I come back and I see last week I scored a 6 and this week I scored a 6.5 on whatever the measure is, I am automatically motivated to see how long it's going to take me or what I have to do to get to a 7. Those changes and measuring what we're doing matters. And so I know that you at the time were like, but Marva, I'm getting really great results. I'm moving people forward. And my answer was, you absolutely are. You may also remember that you came to me at one point and you said, Dave wants me to turn everything into an analytical exercise, and that I have to have all the right answers and all the right methodologies for the decision trees in order to get to this answer. And my answer to you was, no, not really. You have a different method of learning and you have a different way of thinking through issues, but your answers are always good. Trust your gut, trust your instinct and your kind of intuitive way of getting to an answer, and then go back and fill in the blanks for Dave so that you can persuade him that you've done the right thing. Do you remember that
I
conversation?
do. I remember exactly. It was in your office, and I remember which direction I was facing and which end of the room we were in. I do.
And that conversation surprised you because you were coming to me with like, I don't think I can do this. And my answer was, of course you can do this. You've been doing this. You just don't know how to articulate it in the way that makes Dave comfortable because the two of you speak different languages. It doesn't mean that one language is less valid than the other. They're just different languages to get to good results. But in the end, the results that we measure are the ones that are measurable in the language we can translate to business people and executives for the kinds of impact that we're having.
And that's what we did. At the end of it, David Bowen came in with 9 months of work, $4 million worth of value in closed projects. And that
And
was a legacy.
significant additional value in projects that were not yet closed, in projects that had never been formally supported by us, but that we had taught people the kinds of things that they needed to do, but we didn't track them because they weren't part of our project management office. There was a lot going on there. And there was a lot, frankly, of work that was done that was highly innovative and highly transformational. One of them that I'm proudest about was the marriage of the product team, the product creative team, and the manufacturing group that put together, we sat down and we talked about how could they reduce batch sizes so that they could eliminate so much obsolescence so that they could actually create more designs more quickly and get them out into the market. Do you remember that?
I do.
And we ended up with this marriage of the two disciplines that went from our average batch size being, I think it was 36,000 units, to our average batch size being something under 5,000 units, and our turnaround time going from 6 months to 2 weeks before we could break a cycle and reorder or reproduce something that was doing very well. And the design people didn't fully understand what that had done to manufacturing. The manufacturing people didn't fully understand what had happened in design. But the end result was we had less obsolescence, we had more innovation, we had better in-stock delivery of those products, and we had significantly more satisfied customers because we could get them what they wanted and we could respond much more quickly to know what they didn't like and what they did like. And we did some really simple things like change from real metallic ink that left metallic flakes on the printing presses to ink that looked like it was metallic but didn't leave the same residue.
Yeah, the efficiencies skyrocketed. They truly did, and that's exactly what the company needed us to do. So now let's review the story arc, or you can, put a bow on it if you would like.
Okay.
What have we not talked about that you feel is important in making cultural transformation happen?
Well, there has to be a perceived need. If there is no perceived need or perceived benefit that is greater than the cost of what you have to give up, you can't get there. No matter how hard you try, if the population that you're working with is complacent and they're comfortable, you are not going to get a cultural transformation. So the first thing you have to really understand is where is the need and why are people feeling pain? And typically the why people are feeling pain is that mismatch between the what we say we do and who we really are. And it's that disintegrity, if you will, the lack of integrity behind who we believe we are and who we actually behave to ourselves to be. And the greatest need, therefore, is how do we get the alignment?
Yeah.
Now, The step in that is to help people, first of all, understand the pain and understand what's causing their pain and feel it very personally. It's not about that I feel this because the company is suffering. I need to feel it in my own soul that I am in a position where I'm out of integrity. Either I'm out of step with the organization, or I'm out of step with what the organization represents, or I'm, somehow the things that I'm doing are out of integrity with what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
And then, so we get the individuals start to feel that, and then we help them understand what can change. And one of the things that I find myself doing a lot of lately is helping individuals understand there are those things that were within your control and those things that are outside your control. The only tools that you have to work with when you start are the ones that are within your control and the ones that you can strongly influence. If you try to create a solution that has to do primarily with getting other people to change, it won't work. It's like a marriage counselor or a psychologist telling an individual, asking your spouse to make all the changes because you're already perfect will never get you the results that you want. The only thing you can really affect is the things that are within your control, your own behaviors, your own outcomes, your own desires. Those are the things you have to work with. And so people need to begin to understand that how can I change in order to gain greater integrity with the things that matter in the organization so that the contributions that I'm making have a greater impact on the direction that the organization is heading in alignment with where we want it to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I consistently see those changes in individuals at the individual contributor level accelerating the change in the organization because cultural change begins with the individual.
It does. It does. Wow. What have we not said that you feel like we need to end with, Marva? This has been invigorating and exciting.
Well, I already said the thing from Kim Scott and Radical Candor that, culture beats strategy every time, because culture is what you do every single day. And you can only really implement strategy if the culture is behind it. And the other thing I would say is that you have to start with not just understanding the pain, but feeling the pain, and then connecting emotionally to the individual and to the pain. So even today, in the organization that I lead today, I spend a significant amount of my time talking to individuals about the change that they can affect by managing the things that they have influence over, by making changes in their own behaviors and their own expectations. And then I stand back and watch miracles happen. I mean, and that is probably the greatest satisfaction, is watching individuals who are frustrated recognize the value of their own power, whether that power is their expert power or their positional power or their relationship power or all of it. And I'm using power in a very positive sense, not in some of the abuse of power, but in owning the power in order to move forward and to recognize all the levers I have control over as an individual contributor, that I can make a difference in the lives of people around me. And I've watched that in the last few weeks as I've been talking to individuals who have been frustrated, who have like turned on a dime, and seeing the outcome of just a 1 hour conversation and then some self-reflection on their part, and then the way they show up differently to the world that they're working with and the impact that they have on that world that they're working with, which then opens up impact for other people. We tend to think of strategy as top down. Somebody in the executive suite makes some big overarching decision and then we drive it into the organization. I believe that culture is actually bottom up.
I would too.
It starts with a vision of what we want the culture to be, but then we really work it from that we need to change the attitudes and behaviors of the individuals who then change the collective attitudes and behaviors, who then grow and build something that's greater than we ever could have imagined.
I agree. It's the epitome of what Judith E. Glaser would talk about, of co-creating something that's never existed prior to that point.
Because the creativity of the individuals involved as you unleash their potential is light years ahead of what it was when we were trying to top down mandate it.
Yes. They open up, they get in, and the science behind it, the neurosciences, they get into the executive brain, they connect with the neurons in the heart and the gut. They become more enlightened as human beings, more intelligent, more inspirational, and they connect with others, and it's exponentially powerful.
So can I tell you a story about a group I'm working with right now that I'm just so proud of them? We had a staffing challenge, and without giving away too much information, the director of this particular team resigned. And this team had been expressing some frustrations with feeling like they'd been held back and feeling like they were being micromanaged and that they weren't really allowed to kind of to feel their own power. And so I took responsibility for this group for a while. And one of the first things we talked about was recruiting a new director. And I said, I think I've found a director I'd like you guys to interview. And they did. And they came back, and one of them had the courage to say, Marva, we really appreciate that you've done this work. We would really like to get involved and help you find our next boss. And while we really liked this person, we don't think they're the right person. And we are willing to help you find that right person. We're willing to help with the recruiting effort. We're willing to help with the screening effort. And it took a huge amount of courage for that individual contributor to step forward and talk to the CEO and say, no, we'd like to go a different direction. Wow. And she was terrified. The whole team was terrified that she was going to get crucified. And I said, congratulations. You have just done something incredibly brave, and I am incredibly proud. And she said, really, I'm not going to get in trouble for it? And I said, no, I am so proud that you've done what I've told you I wanted you to do, that I'm going to let this team take over the recruiting effort. Come back to me when you got the top candidates that you want the leadership team to interview. And you know what? They did. And the candidates that they brought forward from their own efforts and their own analysis and creating criteria and they evaluated like 150 candidates. And they came back with, here are the 7 that we think are worth talking to. And they ran the whole process, and they were still afraid that I was going to be upset with them. And I said, how does it feel to own your power?
Wow.
And that entire team has elevated their performance to a completely different level in a matter of weeks.
That's the power of the transformation that you're talking about, and starting at the bottom level. Marva, this has been fabulous. I know people who will listen will probably want to listen again. Where can people get in contact with you if they want to learn more from you or connect? I know you're on LinkedIn. Where else?
I'm certainly on LinkedIn, and I'm available through WBECS. If they send an email specifically to me to support@wbecs.com, it will get to me. And the reason I suggest that is because I get something like 200 emails a day. If they send it directly to me, the chances that I'm actually going to get to it are pretty low. If they send it to me through the support team will nag me until I get to it.
Okay, that's good. Support at
WBECS.com.
Okay. Thank you for your time, for your wisdom. I really appreciate you sharing what you have to share with this audience.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.